And of course, being an unemployed actor, I was like I had the plague. It's just so funny. You go to these parties, people go, "Oh, hi, you're John. What do you do?" I say, "Oh, I'm an actor." And then they go, "Oh," and then they'd walk away. Or
Then they
they'd see
wander
someone
off.
else.
Yeah.
It was just, it was like having, like leprosy or something. And then Ghost comes out, and instantaneously, all of those same people who were mean to me were like hugging me like I was their old friend, and they would love me. And I was like, I didn't know how to manage that. I'd go to a party and say, like, "Tony, oh, remember we had dinner a couple of years ago? I knew you were going to be a big star." And so that I was like, oh my God, how do I handle this Hollywood thing? I was not a natural at it, put it that way.
This is Talking Pictures, a movie memories podcast from Turner Classic Movies and HBO Max. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Today's guest, Tony Goldwyn. You might know Tony for playing the president in Scandal, or more recently, the leader of a secret white supremacist society in One Battle After Another from director Paul Thomas Anderson, won the Oscar for Best Picture. Tony has a broad skill set, but one of his strengths is playing charming bad guys. Not charming rascals, but deeply evil characters. Still charming, though. Tony's breakout role came in Ghost from 1990. That got all of it going.
Cut her throat.
Carl.
I swear to God. I'll cut her throat. I need that money and I want it tonight at 11 o'clock. If that psychic lady does not bring it here, Molly is dead, okay?
Carl, who are you talking to?
Tony is also an accomplished director with 5 features under his belt. The most recent, the 2024 film Ezra, starring Bobby Cannavale, Rose Byrne, and Robert De Niro. Tony has also directed a lot of prestige television. Tony Goldwyn's Hollywood roots run deep. He recently joined me on CBS Sunday Morning to talk a bit about that legacy, so I was thrilled to continue that conversation on the podcast. First of all, Tony, welcome to Talking Pictures. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for doing that CBS Sunday Morning piece.
Yeah, that was a great piece, Ben. I really, I got so many. I got instantly a flood of emails about it. People were really into it.
I started that interview with this question. I'm going to ask the same question. I asked you, who were your grandfathers?
My paternal grandfather was Samuel Goldwyn, who was one of the founders of the movie industry. Produced the first feature that was ever made in Hollywood, The Squaw Man. And he had an extraordinary career up until his last movie, Porgy and Bess, in 1959. And then my maternal grandfather was a wonderful writer, a playwright and screenwriter named Sidney Howard. And Sidney Howard had been a World War I flying ace, one of the first fighter pilots in this country. Went on to become a very successful playwright in the 1920s, won a Pulitzer Prize for a beautiful play called They Knew What They Wanted. And then wrote an incredible play called Dodsworth, which is one of my personal favorites. Many others, and then in the 1930s went to Hollywood and started writing movies. And I amazingly was under contract to Sam Goldwyn in the 1930s and wrote a lot of movies for him. And I believe was in that period became the highest paid screenwriter in Hollywood, and eventually wrote the screenplay for Gone with the Wind. Had a tragic accident and died the year Gone with the Wind came out, and he won a posthumous Oscar for Best Screenplay. So I, of course, never knew him, but he was apparently, from everything I know, a wonderful, wonderful man and a writer that I greatly admire.
Yeah, Dodsworth, which came, of course, a sensational movie with Walt Houston, and that was Robert Osborne's favorite movie, apparently. Dodsworth.
Oh, was that Bob's favorite movie? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he loved that movie. Yeah,
wow,
so
okay.
I mean, if it wasn't his favorite, it was always in his top 5.
Yeah, it's one of mine.
It's pretty great, pretty great. So that phrase, the highest paid screenwriter in Hollywood in the 1930s, I have heard said about only one other writer, my grandfather, Herman Mankiewicz.
Oh, okay.
It's entirely possible that they were both at one time the highest paid
They're
screenwriter.
both doing okay.
My grandfather didn't know how to talk to his bosses, except I think he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was sort of constantly sabotaging his career, in part because he didn't think that this business, movie making, was worthy, right? Didn't think it was serious, this sort of popcorn for the masses. And it was, he had been a theater critic for the New Yorker, which, that was serious business. Writing a play, writing a Pulitzer Prize winning play like Sidney Howard, that was serious. Writing the great American novel, that was serious. But the movies, he had this instinct that they weren't worthy. And I think he was embarrassed. And I think that came from his father. Did you have any sense of having two grandfathers there in early Hollywood that they had any doubts about the seriousness or worthiness of movies?
Well, starting with Sam Goldwyn, I think he fought very hard to make it a serious endeavor. He was obsessed, I think partly out of his insecurity growing up uneducated as a Polish immigrant who came to the States with nothing as a teenager and was never formally educated. He had a kind of intellectual snobbery and wanted to only work with the great writers and the best playwrights and the best novelists adapting their work. And so he was, I think, a bit of I'd say an intellectual snob sounds negative. I think he just had incredible reverence for great writers and great writing. And wanted the movie business to be respectable in that way and to do things what was in his view the highest quality and have the greatest people doing it. And I think that was from the beginning his idea when they started Famous Players and whatever it was, 1910, or when he and Jesse Lasky started that company that ultimately made The Squaw Man and ultimately became Paramount Pictures. I think their idea was to take great writing and plays that were hits on Broadway and make them into full-length cinematic experiences. So look, he made a lot of movies that would not be considered high art, and ultimately he was a businessman, I think, and wanted to survive. But that was very important to him. Sidney Howard, I don't know. I mean, my impression is that he was a very practical guy, and he had achieved success as a playwright. Before that, he'd gone to the famous sort of playwriting program at Harvard after he'd graduated from Berkeley, and then went to the war and came back and was a journalist, sort of a yellow journalist, very left-wing journalist, and started writing plays. He went to Hollywood to make money because his wife, my mother's mother, died suddenly, tragically, somewhat would say scandalously.
How was it scandalous? I don't know that story.
Oh, it's a great story. So my grandmother, Claire Ames, was a very kind of up-and-coming actress in the theater in the 1920s and made her big success in Sidney Howard's early plays. She was considered a real rising star. And one of his plays that she was in was called, there was a big hit, was called The Silver Cord. And that she played the lead in the London production of that, opposite a famous English actor named Brian Aherne, who went on to have quite a good movie career and became a real star. So she and Brian Aherne, and as I understand it, she and Brian Aherne fell in love while they were in London. And Sidney Howard was in New York, and my mother was a baby, and Claire was not much interested in being a mother, I don't think. And so she was carrying on with Brian Aherne. It was terribly painful for Sidney. He was desperately in love with her. But she wouldn't divorce him because she didn't, want the bad publicity. She was very worried about her career image and all of that. So they lived this kind of torturous couple of years while she was doing the play, I think living with Brian Aherne from what I understand. In, I think, 1930, when my mom was just 5 years old, Claire died suddenly. And the rumor has it, they sort of mysterious circumstances, rumor has it that she was pregnant with Brian's child. And
I see where this is going.
I don't know, was she getting an abortion? No one ever knew. It's just, it's all hearsay, but that's what I heard, that she had died, perhaps having an abortion, or at least of complications. And so the scandal never came out. They kept it under wraps, but it was profoundly painful for Sidney and, of course, for my mom, who didn't really have a relationship with her mother. And then so they moved to California. Sydney's sister and family. He grew up in Walnut Creek, which is just out, by Oakland, in Northern California. So my mom lived with her aunt, Sydney's sister, and Sydney would commute. On weekends, he'd spend with the family up north, and then during the week, he'd come down to L.A. and write, and under contract for Sam Goldwyn, who ended up, my parents ended up getting married. But so back to your original question, I think the movies for him were a godsend because it enabled him to make money and support his kid and have be a good father, and which he was, I think. I know my mom adored him. They were very, very close. And so that was really where his head was at.
So then, given the tragedy and the suddenness of granted an absentee mother, but of your mother's death, to get back to Sydney's death, which I didn't really expect to talk about, but then now it feels like your mom suffered what, no child should go through then when she's also just a kid. Her dad dies in this crazy farming accident after production on Gone with the Wind, but before he can get because he farmed land, right? He was an actual in Massachusetts.
Yeah, they lived in New York City, and after his early success, they bought a small farm in Massachusetts in the Berkshire Mountains, which is a beautiful place where people would go and have country homes. They bought this beautiful farm in this place called Tyringham, which is a magical place. And it was like they had a tenant farmer who actually farmed the land, but Sydney loved it, and they would go up and spend holidays and weekends and summers up there, and sort of became kind of a family compound, which still exists today. It's beautiful. One weekend, Sydney, he loved to go out and work on the farm with the farmhands, and he got in those days tractors. The way you started them was you had a crank in the front, like an old Model T car, and the tractor was parked against a barn wall, and Sydney cranked up the motor, but one of the farmhands had left the tractor in gear, and it pinned him against the wall and killed him.
It's a terrible story, and then and then hence the posthumous award for Gone with the Wind. So did your mother carry this? Would you say you observed a woman who sort of carried the scars of those losses as a kid, or did she manage?
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, she managed it, but it was terrible for her.
Who was your mom? What's your mom's name?
Jennifer.
Yeah,
Jennifer Howard and Jennifer Goldwyn.
And
eventually, she married a guy named John Coleman, my stepfather, so she was Jennifer Coleman finally.
She was an actor too, right? Your mom acted? Yeah, and sort of gave it up.
Yeah, she started out by the time I came around, she'd pretty much stopped. But she was an actress in the 40s and 50s. She was in the actor studio and, worked with Kazan and, she worked with some great people. And then, my dad and she decided to move back to L.A. Because he felt really that's where he wanted his career to be. He had been working for CBS News for Edward R. Murrow was his mentor initially in his career. And then, but I think he got some pressure from his dad, Sam Senior, to come out and join the movie business. So they moved to LA, and my mom was never happy being an actor in LA. She didn't really feel comfortable working in front of the camera, I don't think. And she did a bunch of work, but finally when she had 4 kids, she stopped. And she was a painter as well, so she became a full-time painter after she stopped acting.
So she was a real artist.
She was, yeah.
And she got to experience. I know she died somewhat young, but she got to experience your breakthrough success, though.
She did, yeah. She was a great, me being an actor made my poor father terribly anxious.
Right. Yeah.
In the early years, anyway, and my mom loved it. Like, sure, I think she was, for vicarious, because she had to sort of abandon her dream, I think, and then the fact that she was always a great cheerleader for me. And then when I started having some success, she couldn't have been more thrilled. So she died a couple of years after. I'm trying to think. She died in 92 or 93. I think the end of 1992, she died. So Ghost had come out already and was a big hit. And I'd been in a few
were you in Ghost?
Movies. And
yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
So that had happened. So she was happy. She never got to see me, she would have liked to see me become a director and stuff, but.
I'm going to jump around a little bit here because you mentioned your father, and your father was super supportive of your career, but as you said, he was he was anxious. And I mean, first of all, he's the one who told you should produce and direct, right, at a very, very early age.
Did. That's right.
When you wanted to be an actor, I mean, you've told the story before, but it's a great story. You're young, you're walking in Hollywood. Your dad doesn't really want you to be an actor. He's nervous about it anyway. Wants you to follow your dream, but he's nervous. What happens?
So it was actually, we were actually in San Francisco.
Oh, okay,
because
great.
I was a senior in high school, I think, and I had applied for a summer program at ACT, which is the great theater school in San Francisco. And they had a summer program for for kids, for high school, college kids. And I think he took me up, like good dad, took me to San Francisco to audition for ACT. And we auditioned. And when I look back, it's kind of sweet because he was really worried that I was taking this so seriously. And we walked by a poster of Saturday Night Fever, which was just the giant hit in the theaters. Like John Travolta was the biggest star in the world.
And there's like the poster of Travolta, like with his.
It was a poster of Travolta, exactly.
With his arm raised up.
Yeah. And he goes, I just want you to know, if you're not John Travolta by the time you're 25, there's really no career. And I kind of I sort of froze. And I just thought to myself, that can't be true. That just can't be right. So I kind of was like, okay, and soldiered on. But yeah, for the first maybe, 5 or 6 years, it was just hard for him. But we know, which was a little hard for me, but we figured it out. And then eventually became my greatest cheerleader.
What we started talking about, which was you entering this business. You and I would both be referred to by that term, nepo babies, and I know you got a podcast sort of about that. Not really, it's not quite about that, but it's about about generations that continue in the same business, right? Mm-hmm. You do that with your daughter?
Yeah, my daughter. We interview other parents and children who work in the same business. Yeah,
and that's your daughter Anna, who's a screenwriter.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that podcast called?
Far from the Tree.
Far from the Tree. So going into that business, your choice, that comes with, again, we're both going to do this where we're not complaining about it, but it does come with a unique pressure.
For sure.
What is that pressure?
Well, for me, God, it was having a famous last name and then deciding that I wanted to kind of make my way in the same business. There's a bar that's set that you feel if you can't rise to the level of that bar, you're somehow, you've kind of failed.
Sure, right.
And yet, what you come to realize is there is no bar. There's, it's a self-created thing that one has to come to terms with. So for me, all of us need to, as young adults, so as we understand, we have to individuate and create our own identity and find ourselves in what we do and our voice and our reputation and all of that, which psychologically is very challenging when you have these people who are, have done it before you. And so it's a combination of, for me, it was a combination of the pressure of my forebears and what they had achieved. And then the other frustrating thing for me, which again, I realized was completely self-created, was the sense of people judging you. Like, oh, you just are doing this because your family did it, or your dad did it, or you've got a famous last name, or somehow these things just come to you, which I can assure you is not the case. But, it was like a hang up. And so for me, the way that I dealt with it was hard in my 20s. I moved, I wanted to live in New York because I wanted to work in the theater. So that helped a bit, not being in LA. And when I would work in the theater at first, people wouldn't really put it together, the Goldwyn thing. But usually like 3 weeks into a rehearsal period, someone would go, Goldwyn, is that like Goldwyn, like MGM? Is that? And then I'd say, yeah, but they'd already sort of kind of knew who I was. So, but when I went out to LA, started going to LA looking for work, every meeting I'd go into, oh, I know your brother, I know your dad. And that was tough. And then, I kind of said to myself, well, I just have to suck it up and figure this out for myself. Cause it's my burden to figure it. I kind of knew somehow that I had to, make my way through it. So, and then where I sort of came to once I did find my feet and had some success and started to have my own sense of myself in the business, it eventually, it became, I found a very beautiful thing. Now I feel so privileged and lucky to be a part of legacy. And the relationship that I ended up, having with my dad while he was still with us was the fact that we shared that was a really beautiful thing. And my brother John, who was very successful as first a studio executive and then a producer, and it's something that is an intimacy we share. And my little brother Peter, same, so the family thing I find great, which is why Anna and I wanted to do the podcast, because I have now both of my kids. My daughters are both, and Anna's a writer, and Tess, her younger sister, is an actress and a writer and filmmaker, making her first feature this spring, actually, that she wrote and is directing. And so, and that's a very intimate part of our relationship. And my wife, Jane, is a great production designer. So it's a family, it just is, So, but it is, it's a challenge. It was a challenge at the beginning.
In a sense, your daughters have the weight of that even more than you do, because you are, I mean, it's funny, Sam Goldwyn helped found 3 studios, but you're more famous because you were on TV for a long time.
Exactly.
It's it's just the stupidity of how things work, but
So true.
because you're an actor, so you thereby just have a degree more of fame.
It's quite a natural thing. In any other business, you think, well, of course you're a plumber because your dad was a plumber. So why wouldn't you take go in the family business?
And, doctors, lawyers, I mean, and obviously athletes. I mean, there's no question. You're I'm a big basketball fan. As we're taping this during the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
There's so many players on teams whose parents were athletes somewhere.
For sure. We've been interviewing, Anna and I have been interviewing a bunch of athletes. We had Sarah Strong and Allison Feaster. Sarah Strong, who's this great star of UConn. And her mom was a pro basketball player, played for Stanford and wanted to be a pro basketball player. And now she works for the Celtics. And, so it is, and her dad as well. So,
yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And that whatever that gene is that you guys have as actors, it's not surprising that you would hand it down, know, and they have to nurture it. It doesn't just, they can't, anyway, so we get it.
The thing that Jane and I really did as parents, first of all, I was very determined to not express the anxiety that my father did, because that just wasn't helpful to me in my 20s. And also, he wasn't an actor, so he just saw actors failing. It freaked him out. And I knew how lucky I was to have found something that I was intensely passionate about. So Jane and I just kept reinforcing to our kids that this is a working profession. Like, it ain't, the part that we love is the work. All the glitz and glamour is kind of fun sometimes. It's sometimes stressful, but that's not the business. So it's a working profession, no different than anything else. And that was all we wanted to, kind of instill in our kids. And it's still not easy. It was hard. Particularly my daughter, who's an actor, she would have rather, she gets exhausted by people going, "Oh, I know Tony." She's like, "Yeah, right. Just let me do my job."
Right. I got it. Tony, a quick break. We're going to come back and actually talk about, in a weird way, your career, which I, after spending basically the entire interview on your family. Sorry. Okay, we'll be right back. Okay, so we'll talk about what Ghost did for your career, but there was a movie before Ghost. There was Friday the 13th Part 6? 6. 7? 6?
6.
That's everyone's favorite one.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. I'm in it for, I think, 2 minutes. Yeah, I think I did two movies before Ghost. So I did, my very first job in front of a camera, I think. Other than maybe one day with one line on a soap opera, I think. I did this very small part in Friday the 13th Part 6, where I got killed by Jason in the first 2 minutes. Thrilled to have the job. Spent a week in a swamp in Georgia. Shooting nights. It was amazing. And then I think a year later I did a kind of a beautiful movie, a Mexican film called Gaby, that was Luis Mandoki's first. I don't know if you remember Luis Mandoki, the director, who went on to make what was the movie with Andy Garcia and Meg Ryan? A Man Loves a Woman. And he did a bunch of movies in the 90s that were really good. He was a Mexican director. Luis did this beautiful film with Lee Ullman and Robert Loggia and Norma Alejandro, who was a great Argentine actress. So that was fun. That was like sort of a real movie. But other than that, I was doing like anything I could, work in the theater, guest stars on television shows, and you know.
And evidence of that is that Friday the 13th Part 6 is 86. Ghost is 90. So you do those things in between, but it's not like, and even after Ghost, which was this mega hit and a surprise hit, it wasn't that expensive a movie, and then it becomes a phenomena, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even then, it's not like that didn't mean things started happening immediately for you, which I'm sure, of course, you had to think they probably would. You can't help but feel a little bit optimistic after you see what's happening with Ghost.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, the way that it's so funny, the way the sort of rhythm of things went. You know, I came to New York determined to make this work and be an actor, and that was great. And started, banging on doors and getting, some work in the theater, which is what my dream was, and that was all great. The first couple of years, literally put on a show with my friends in a friend's apartment to get an agent, and just did what actors do, and started getting work. And then a couple of years in, I realized, okay, I'm gonna start. I got going in for bigger roles in the theater. I was losing them out to people in movies and television. So I, came out to LA and started trying to break into that. And in those days, there was a real separation between movies and TV. If you were a TV actor, you just couldn't break into movies. And if you were a movie actor, you didn't dare go back to television. And so at the beginning, that
was admitting defeat.
It was.
Right?
So at the beginning, I just wanted any work I could get. So I took, I got my SAG card on St. Elsewhere, and I did LA Law and, these episodes of TV shows, sitcoms. And I did a pilot for CBS that Barbara Streisand produced. I remember there was a comedy with Shelley Berman and Geraldine Fitzgerald,
oh my gosh.
and which is crazy, but never went anywhere. And then these little parts in movies, but what happened was I couldn't get even auditions for movies because I had done television. So I could not even get, to get an audition for a movie was such a rare thing. I'd fight to get in.
And you heard, directly, you could feel that, or you heard that is because you were a guest star on TV episodes, just how it was.
It was just how it was. My agent was more of a TV agent in those days. So she was just like, I can't get you in. And I knew there was just a stigma against TV actors, and you had to like bust your way in. And Jane was designing Ghost, and Jane's career had already took off. So she did Blood Simple and Raising Arizona, which were the first two Coen brothers movies, and those were her first two movies.
By the way, can I just say, the production design, I don't know what I'm talking about, but the production design on Blood Simple is like as good, whatever that is, that's as good.
Isn't that amazing?
That's as good as a production designer can do. That's
yeah. No, it's magic. And that obviously launched her. So all of a sudden she's doing all these big movies. And when she was doing the designer on Ghost, she would come home and say, they haven't cast this role of the villain. They can't find the guy. And I'm like, Jane, I can't even get an audition. Like, I would bug my agents. I could not get in on that movie. And I said, that's a lead role. They're never going to hire me. And she just kept beating on me, going, you got to call your agent. So I would call every day, say, I know they haven't cast that. And my agent would be like, yeah, no, they want a big name for that part. And then finally the assistant said, my agent's assistant said, I'm going to get you in on that. He said, they should see you. So I went on tape for the casting directors. And then
so you went in, you went to a audition. There's the casting directors there. They got a camera up, and you just read. There was no star there. You just read with the casting.
No. Didn't even get to meet the director. I remembered my agent calling me and saying, the director doesn't want to meet you because he doesn't want to know who you are. I don't know if you should go in on this. They just want to put you on tape. I was like, of course I want to go. Are you crazy? Yeah. So I go in. I read a couple of scenes on videotape for the Jane Jenkins and Janet Hershenson were these lovely casting directors, and then forgot about it. And then a few months later, I actually was rehearsing a play in New York because as this business goes, I've been very close to getting a television pilot, and I'd been gone through all these stages of testing for a lead role on a series. And in the last minute, it was like between me and two other guys, and I didn't get it. And I finally was like, you know what? This is not working. I'm done. I'm going to go back to New York. If I only make $300 a week in the theater, that's what I'm going to do. This isn't working. So I came back to New York to do a play at the Williamstown Theater Festival, which is this great summer theater where I actually started working. And we were in rehearsal, and I get a call saying a message saying your agent called, to call your agent. I was like, my agent never calls me. Why would they be calling me? So it's at the lunch break. I go on these days of payphones. I put my quarter in the payphone. I call up and like, Tony, you remember that movie Ghost that you auditioned for? They want to screen test you for that. I'm like, what? It was 2 or 3 months before. They said, yeah, they hadn't been able to find the guy and they stumbled on your tape and they want to fly you to LA on your day off to screen test for it. So I was so excited, of course. And on my day off, I went out to LA in my one blue suit that I had and went to Paramount Pictures. And those days, the screen test was like on a stage with, 35 millimeter cameras. It wasn't like a videotape thing. And I didn't read with Demi, but I read with the casting people. But it was they had to go through like hair and makeup and the whole day on a set.
Yeah, now
so
you're
cool.
shooting in front of. Now you got a movie camera shooting you. Now it's different.
Yeah, it was so cool. Yeah. Maybe I'd done one other screen test for something, but that was thrilling. I thought, this is all I get to do. This is awesome. And then God, somehow I got the part, and that was. But anyway, so then after that, I thought, okay. I've did my job. Like I'm in a hit movie, and that same year I was in a play off Broadway, and I won an Obie Award for it, and it was this big hit. And I thought, all right, great.
Award is like a Tony for off Broadway. Right?
For off Broadway, exactly. Those are the awards for off Broadway, and I did this beautiful play. And while Ghost was in the theaters, it was just like magic. And that same year, our daughter was born, everything was going great, and I thought, okay, now it all happens. Right. That's how it, and then I learned, oh no, that's not how it happens. Because then if the next movie you do doesn't make money, then you're not as hot as you were the year before. So a couple of years later, I was working and grateful to be working and able to support my family. And, Jane obviously had a very successful career too, but I was doing the thing, but I wasn't a movie star. I was, so that was when I realized, oh, I need to get control of this. Because if I'm in my 40s, I don't want to be like, praying that someone gives me a job or the right thing comes along.
So, right. So when your second movie doesn't go as well, then you start to take matters into your own hands, and that's when you realize that.
Yeah. So I did. I just wanted to work, and so I did a couple of movies that, there were, and then that didn't make that much money. So suddenly I felt like, oh, I'm not as. The thing that had freaked me out was I would go to Hollywood parties and stuff. Oh God, in the '80s when I was struggling. And I was a young actor, and my brother John, who I adore, his career was like on fire as a studio executive. And John was like, oh, you got to meet this person, you got to meet that person, you got to come to this party, he was trying to help me out. And of course, being an unemployed actor, I was like I had the plague. It's just so funny. You go to these parties, people go, oh, hi, you're John, what do you do? I say, oh, I'm an actor. And then they go, oh, and then they'd walk away. Or
then they wander off. Yeah.
It was just, It was like having, like leprosy or something. And then Ghost comes out, and instantaneously, all of those same people who were mean to me were like hugging me like I was their old friend, and they would love me. And I was like, I didn't know how to manage that. I'd go to a party and say, like, Tony, oh, remember we had dinner a couple of years ago? I knew you were going to be a big star.
Yeah.
And so that I was like, oh my God, how do I handle this Hollywood thing? I was not a natural at it, put it that way. So anyway, I continued to work. So a couple of years later, not that long after Ghost, my dad had been saying to me, Tony, you're more than just an actor. You have a really good head for story, and I think you should be you're a director. I think there's a director in there. And I was like, Pop, I'm an actor. Stop telling me I'm to do something else. But I finally kind of heard him, and at that same time, I thought I need to get control of this. I need to control my destiny. So my thought was, if I started finding scripts to produce that I could act in, the next time I was in a hit, instead of what I'd experienced before, was going to my agents going, okay, I'm in a hit, get me the right script.
Take advantage of this. Let's go.
I was like, well, if I have a script that I know I want to do, that I've worked on, I can say, okay, now I want to do this. And I thought was a good idea. So I started reading scripts and looking for them. And it took, a couple years, and I found a script that I just fell in love with, but I honestly didn't feel that right to act in it. But I wanted to meet the writer, this young writer named Pamela Gray. And it was a script called The Blouse Man that she had written as her thesis film at UCLA in film school. And it got all this attention. And she amazingly won an award at UCLA that was named after my grandfather started, called the Samuel Goldwyn Writing Award. And she had won that award. And that wasn't how I found the script, but I just thought it was a cool synergy.
Yeah, it's totally
so
cool.
Pam and I said, I love your script. She said, well, I love your ideas for my script. Would you produce it with me? I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So we just started working on this. It took us a few years. And meanwhile, I was working as an
just
actor.
pause on that for 1 sec.
Oh, yeah.
It took you a few years, and not because you guys were procrastinating, just because that's sometimes how long this takes. Yeah.
It's what it takes. You know, she would rewrite and I'd give it back and forth. And of course, I'm,
right.
working
and you're
as an actor
trying to have a career, both of you.
I'm having a career and doing movies and did some, very successful movies in that time in the mid 90s. But eventually we had this script that was really good. The draft was great. And I was meeting directors and I thought, I can't give this to somebody else. They might fuck it up. Like what if I've worked so hard on this and someone doesn't do it right? And I suddenly had like an epiphany and heard my father's voice. And I was like, oh, I need to direct this myself. And then about 2 months later, I get a call from a guy named John Levin, who was an agent at CAA. And John said, Tony, you control the Blouse Man, don't you? I said, yeah. He said, and you want to direct it. Isn't that right? I said, yeah. And he said, well, Dustin Hoffman wants to read it. His company has a deal to make a bunch of indie movies, and he wants to read it. I was like, what? Long story short, I meet with them. They want to make it. And all of a sudden, I'm like, have the money to make my first feature film.
And what's interesting to me when I hear you tell that story is that there at no point did they be like, Tony, we want to buy this from you and we're going to get somebody else to direct it. They're comfortable letting you direct it. That seems like that was never an issue.
It was. I met with Murray Shizgal, who was one of Dustin's dearest friend, and was his kind of story guy at his company. Murray had been a quite very successful playwright in the 60s, and had, I think, rewritten Tootsie or something. And he and Dustin were great pals. But he was an older, New York guy, and he calls me up after I had sent the script in. I'd never met anybody. I get a call going, hello, Tony? Is this Tony Goldwyn? I said, yes, it's Murray Shizgal. Please don't show anyone else your script. We'd like to make a deal with you. And I was driving the car. I almost crashed my car. I said, he said, come see me. So I go to his apartment in Central Park West. He says, so you want to direct this film, right? And I thought he was going to give me a hard time about it.
Right, yeah.
And I said, yes, I do. He said, good. Dusty likes actor directors. That's good. It's great. And how much do you think you need to make it? Like, what's your budget? And I had been fighting to get the budget under $2 million, but it was a period movie set in the 60s. And I was about to say, well, we're trying to do it for, under $2 million. He said, do you think you could do it for $6 million? I said, yeah, I think we probably could do that.
Well, if I cut here, yeah.
He said, good. So that was like, October of whatever year it was. And then by, December, we were rolling, January, we made it that next May. It ended up being called A Walk on the Moon with Diane Lane and Viggo Mortensen and Liev Schreiber and Anna Paquin, Tova Feldshuh.
Anna Paquin plays the 14-year-old daughter.
Yeah. And it was this beautiful experience that was and then I realized I didn't know if I'd like directing, and I just realized it was like putting on a suit of clothes that felt very natural to me.
It's a beautiful movie. Thanks. I watched it again, made me cry again. It's got this great ending. It's just great. It's great.
Oh,
everybody's really good in it. I also watched your second film again, which was not
which one? Someone like you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was not an auspicious.
Well, first of all, I like romantic comedies, and so for me not to like a romantic comedy has to be a disaster, and this was definitely not a disaster. But I see why, it doesn't. Like the person who directed A Walk on the Moon, this wasn't it's not the same kind of movie. And
that was a really interesting experience for me because Walk on the Moon got all this positive attention. We went to Sundance, got a standing ovation. It got very good reviews. Everyone wanted to meet me, and I was suddenly a director, and it was awesome. But the next movie I wanted to make. We couldn't get it together. It was a movie more like A Walk on the Moon, a real meaty subject matter. It was a beautiful script, and then Fox offered me. It had been maybe a year or two, and Fox offered me this movie that was greenlit with Ashley Judd already attached to star. It was this romantic comedy, and the script was quite quirky. And I thought, oh, okay. It was quite quirky, but it also needed a lot of work between now and when we went into production. I was like, okay, we'll fix it. And they offered me a lot more money than I got paid to do A Walk on the Moon. And it was just like, okay, now this is going to be a hit. And and I did it for that reason. I thought, okay, well, now I'll do a commercial movie. I guess it's got a movie star attached, and
Yeah, right.
you know, and we'll fix the script problems. And I made the error of going into production with a script that was not fixed.
Right.
And I learned like, oh, it's just not in my wheelhouse to make movies because that's what people say is going to be commercial. I just don't know how to do that. So whereas A Walk on the Moon was absolutely from my heart
Right.
and
It's
organic,
like
and wherever its
nurtured
failings may
yeah.
be, it's, you know, the heart in it is there. So someone like you was a real lesson for me, because it didn't, you know, I guess it did okay at the box office, but it wasn't a big hit, and it wasn't expressive of me at all. It felt kind of a, you know, a generic studio rom-com.
So I'm going to jump ahead to your most recent movie, Ezra, which definitely feels more like the guy who directed A Walk on the Moon than
For sure.
someone like you. And so by then when was A Walk on the Moon? 2001?
Walk on the Moon was 1999.
1999. So
And then 2001 was Someone Like You.
So this is Ezra's
Yeah.
25 years later,
Yeah,
from the
basically.
first one. So how are you different as a director? And include in that answer, how do you know what to do, man? I mean, like by the time you do Ezra and you're directing Robert De Niro, like it's not the same as directing Bobby Cannavale, great actor
That's
who was
true.
the lead in Ezra.
Yeah.
And how do you, like, what's the way of getting past that? Like, it's just reality is that
everyone,
De Niro takes your breath away a little bit.
Yeah, of course he does. It's intimidating. But I've worked now with many icons over the years. I've had the privilege of working, you know, like Dustin produced my first movie. I've worked with Denzel. I've worked with, you know, with Duvall and different, you know, people who I kind of revered. So when I met with Bob, of course, the first time I was kind of terrified. You just have to be. I've worked with Donald Sutherland, who was like that. But you know, with Bob, just wanted to be good. He wanted the material to be good, and he made an incredible contribution to helping us get the script and his character where we wanted it to be. And I knew I needed to step up, and I couldn't waste any time. And out of respect for him and his process, I had to step up and be, you know, deliver for him. So I had to just quickly get over my intimidation of directing Bob De Niro. So the first couple of scenes, I was like, okay, I just had to shove my way in there, you know. And he was so appreciative, and he
doesn't want a director.
along.
He doesn't want a director who has nothing to say, right? He wants to.
No, because also, if any actor smells that you're scared, you're dead meat.
Yeah,
you know. Because I'm an actor, I know what actors want. So that's the death knell. I've had that experience where actors are intimidated by you. I mean, directors are intimidated by me sometimes, and I'm like, dude, you know, that's just not going to work. Everyone's insecure, and De Niro Bob just wanted to be good, so he would come to me and go, "I don't think it's good enough. Help me? What do I need? No, it's not good enough." You know, then you.
That's well. Anyway, it's a lovely movie. Ezra and Bobby Cannavale's great, and Rose Byrne's great. They're married, by the way. And De Niro, of course, is terrific. All right, one more break, Tony. We'll come back with Super 8. So stick around on Talking Pictures. All right, Tony, back, ready for the Super 8. I'm going to stick a one question in ahead of time. When did Scandal? What's first year Scandal?
2011, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, you're basically 20 years earlier. You taking that would have been an admission of failure,
Yes.
and we weren't totally out of the woods of that yet. So, but it was different. So, was there any hesitation in taking that, or did you think, no, this is just too good, I'm going to do it?
Well, here's what had happened. So in the 90s, it was like death. Once I broke into doing movies, I could not go back to television. That was like death. Then you had Oz and The Sopranos and Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and, you know, cable television had changed the game in terms of television. So by the late, you know, what do you call them, aughts, there was, you know, the television was quite desirable, and very good actors were, you know, the best writing was starting to be on television, and people really wanted to do it. And I had finished directing my previous movie, Conviction, and that came out, and I'd been doing a play on Broadway for a year.
By the way, I also want to tell people to see Conviction if they haven't. Conviction is really good too. I mean, it's my kind of story.
Man. Thank you. Yeah, that one was really from the heart. Sam Rockwell and Hilary Swank are great in that film. So I'd finished that movie, and this is another one. This is kind of funny. That was a movie. Fox Searchlight released it. I'd spent 8 years getting that movie made. It was like, it almost killed me. And everyone was like, this is the one. This is gonna be the Oscar movie. You know, Sam's gonna win an Oscar for this. And I remember my wonderful agent at CA was like, this is the movie that's gonna put you, you're gonna get all these opportunities. This is gonna be huge. And the movie didn't do any business. And you know, we got respectable reviews and people thought, but Sam honestly should have been nominated for an Oscar for his performance. He won a few years later, deservedly, but I was pissed. You know, Hillary won, you know, got nominated for a SAG award. But anyway, the movie didn't perform. And so suddenly I was like, oh, okay, here we are. Here we go again.
Here we are again.
And I'd been doing this musical on Broadway that year, which was a big hit. But then I was like, I'd been making Broadway wages and I thought, oh, I guess the movie's not performing. So I love like the big studio offers aren't falling in my lap. And what do I got? I gotta, you know, make a living here. And I thought, you know, I think I had always stayed away from TV, not just because of the stigma in the 90s, but even when I started directing movies, I thought I can't do a television series because then I won't be available to direct features. So, you know, I'll just, you know, act as I get jobs and then keep working on getting movies going. And this time I was like, I think I'm being stupid. I need to open up my, you know, my thinking to television because look what's happening. So I just said to my agents, I was like, let's see what's out there. You know, maybe I'm open to doing a pilot. And I didn't think I'd want to do a network show like that, a big commercial show.
Right, because the shows you mentioned were cable shows, which had that cable edge.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
This was ABC.
You know, varies, whatever, you know, highbrow kind of stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I'll look at that. And then all of a sudden I get this call saying Shonda Rhimes wants you to play the president in her new show. Would you read this? And I knew Shonda because I had actually, the first television that I directed was Grey's Anatomy when it was first on the third episode, I think, or second or third episode of Grey's. So I knew Shonda from that. And I read it and thought, wow, this is really good. And honestly, my manager, Jason Weinberg, said to me, he said, Tony, I had a little hesitation, like, should I do a network show? Is this the right move to do? And he was like, you're doing this. This could be a big fat hit. Don't worry about it. You know, this is Shonda Rhimes says you should do this. So I thought, okay, well, that's why I pay you. So I'll do it. And then it turned into this amazing experience, which honestly reinvented my career for sure. And all of a sudden at, you know, 50 years old, I was like, I had this resurgence as an actor, and it's been great ever since then. It's been awesome.
All right, let's get into the Super 8. Your most memorable movie watching experience?
My most memorable movie watching experience was The Exorcist in 1973 when it came out into the theaters. I was 13 years old, and it terrified me. I mean, it changed me. It was a profoundly disturbing experience that took me years to shake. But I will never forget
where'd you see
that experience. At the Bruin Theater in Westwood. Not the Bruin, the Avco, which is now, is it still there? The one that looked like a whale on LeConte,
but also in Westwood by UCLA.
In Westwood, yeah.
Who'd you see it with?
My brother John. It was pouring rain. We tried to see it once before, but the lines were so long around the block we couldn't get in. And so John and I went in the pouring rain to see The Exorcist, and I was completely freaked out by it.
Let the enemy have no power over you.
And the sound of the liquid be powerless to harm her.
Your mother sucks cocks in hell,
Lord,
Paris,
hear my
you
prayer.
faithless
My
slime.
cry, come on, please.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
You have given the same answer that Nancy Myers gave to that question.
Did I really?
Yeah,
Well, that's
and
flattering.
she said she basically stayed in the car afterwards. She went to the car, sat in the car, and just couldn't quite move.
Ugh,
Yeah.
I couldn't. It was terrible.
If you had to get a tattoo from a movie, like a line or the title or something, what would that? I'm going to guess you don't have any tattoos. You don't seem.
I don't have tattoos.
Yeah. But if you had to get
I'm
one,
not getting one. I guess maybe honestly, maybe it would have, my favorite line from a movie, I think, is a movie we were discussing earlier from Dodsworth. Love has to stop somewhere short of suicide. Is a Sidney Howard line that I just think is so good.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite movie. So
That's a
Don't
good
know if
one.
that's a tattoo, but I love that one.
be a great tattoo. Well, first of all, a lot of people are picking Dodsworth lines for tattoos. So
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
yeah.
Yes.
Are you going back to that washed-out expatriate in Naples?
Yes, and when I marry her, I'm going back to doing things.
Do you think you'll ever get me out of your blood?
Maybe not, but love has got to stop someplace short of suicide.
What movie would you show a date or someone you're interested in?
Oh, probably The Godfather Part II to see how they reacted to it, because it's maybe my favorite movie.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you
and if someone fell asleep and was bored by it, I'd be like, yeah, it's not gonna work out.
This probably isn't. My cat could be a deal breaker on The Godfather Part II. So, this is a good question for you. Which movie villain do you relate to or feel like is misunderstood?
Other than the ones I've played?
I was going to say, you could be the first person to answer one of your own characters.
Yeah. Carl Brunner in Ghost. A misunderstood villain? Oh, wow.
Or your character in One Battle After Another. By the way, congratulations on all the success that film had. That must have been great.
Yeah, that was exciting. Yeah, I was thrilled, especially for Paul. He so deserves it. Another good villain. I don't. I mean, I sort of, the perverse part of me wants to say Hannibal Lecter, because Anthony Hopkins is so great. But another Anthony Hopkins role that I think is, I guess, the villain of the movie is Howard's End.
Sure.
He's so brilliant, and that's such a great character and a complicated, misunderstood character, which I did sort of a version of that character on stage in a play called The Inheritance. But that's a great dark character, so maybe that character.
That's a good answer. Actors, when you play a villain, like you in Ghost or like you in One Battle After Another, you don't hate that character, right? I mean, that's you. You sort of fall in love with
You have to be that character's advocate. And I always kind of get hurt when people are like, I hated you in that movie. You were so awful. I'm like, really? Why? He's just a human being trying to,
find his way, and circumstances pushed him to, right. But if you hate the character, you won't, because the character itself is probably not self-loathing. Maybe it could be.
Or maybe subconsciously self-loathing, yeah.
Subconsciously, but I mean, outwardly they have to, they're generally doing what they think is best for them.
Like One Battle After Another, my whole sort of approach to that was, this has to be the most charming guy. Everyone's got to want to be a member of that club, the Christmas Adventures Club. He's just got to be so wonderful. And then what's coming out of his mouth is so horrifying. We live by the golden rule. In a network of like-minded men and women dedicated to making the world safe and pure. What would you say to someone who believes that you have been soft in your duty to racial purification?
I would say they are a liar who has no business in society, or on the planet for that matter.
All right, so you're a thief for this question. There's a warehouse that has every movie prop, every movie costume ever. You can steal one thing. What do you take?
Maybe the Maltese Falcon.
Very solid answer. Yeah.
Solid answer? Yeah. It's the only prop I can think of.
I got sent this by the.
Oh.
Yes, right. This is like a murder weapon in a movie.
Oh my God.
This thing
Wait, is that it? Is that the real thing?
No, it's not. No, it's a replica, but it's heavy. No, I don't think I wouldn't loop a couple of miniature teddy bears around it if it were real. Maybe I would. I don't know. But it's a solid answer. It's a good thing to have in your office. All right. What was your mom's favorite movie?
To be honest with you, I don't know. I'll say The Garden of the Finzi Contini, which I know she adored and took me to see. And but I'm not sure what her favorite film of all time was.
Don't you get the feeling that if she were around today and you asked her questions, there's some chance she'd say Ghost, because it just must have been the most exciting experience for her to see your success in that?
I'm not sure. She was she had a critical eye toward things. She would sort of, maybe she would love me in it.
You said she would have some objections
I honestly, that's a good question. I'm not sure what her favorite movie was.
What about your dad?
I would have to say The Best Years of Our Lives. I would think. I know that was the movie that he was most attached to and most proud of his father, and he adored his father. And I may be wrong about that, but I know that was, I would venture to say, it's safe to say that was the closest one to his heart.
So your father, Sam Goldwyn Jr., adored his father, and you adored your father.
I did.
Yeah.
He also maybe my dad would have said a movie he made, a great film he produced called The Madness of King George.
Yeah, that's really
also
good.
He adored, yeah.
So what movie makes you cry without fail?
Wow. These kinds of questions are challenging.
Do you cry? Are you a crier?
I am a crier in life.
I mean, by the way, I rewatched The Walk on the Moon last night. Totally cried. Totally. Yeah.
I'm not coming up with a good answer. I know which one makes me laugh without fail.
Go to that one.
When Harry Met Sally, I love that movie. the Jane designed. I just think it's so.
It's
Billy Crystal's so hilarious in that film.
No, it's the romantic comedy done exactly perfectly, right? Rob Reiner couldn't have done it any better.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you think of a movie that makes you cry, let us know.
I'll email
you can send us a video. All right. So here's the wild card question for you is this one you haven't seen. A Sam Goldwyn movie that you'd like to remake.
Well, the one we've talked about a lot. I don't know if there's an audience for it now, but the movie is Dodsworth. I think it's such an incredible story and such a great character that I would love to play. I'd also love to do, I've talked about doing it on stage too, to doing it, the remounting the play, because it's not been done since the 30s. I just love it. I think it's such a great story about a marriage. So that would be my choice.
And that way also you've covered both your grandfathers with Dodsworth. That's well done. That's a solid answer. Very safe answer. Appease both sides of the family.
Yes, exactly.
Tony, I enjoyed this very much. Thanks for your time here and for the CBS piece a few weeks ago. Always great talking to you.
For sure. So fun. Thanks for having me, Ben.
I love talking with Tony Goldwyn about the movie business. After our conversation, I went back and rewatched Dodsworth from 1936. It stars a guy with another significant Hollywood legacy. Walter Huston is a longtime married man in the film whose wife finds him boring and provincial. Huston is the father of director John Huston, the grandfather of actors Angelica Huston and Danny Huston, and the great-grandfather of actor Jack Huston. In the TCM archives, we found this great Dodsworth nugget from Robert Osborne, the original face of Turner Classic Movies.
Now, the movie Dodsworth is one that many have wanted to remake over the years. At one point, Gregory Peck was spearheading a version in which he would play Sam Dodsworth with Elizabeth Taylor as Fran and Grace Kelly as Edith. Now, Grace at that point was Princess Grace of Monaco, but she expressed an interest to Greg in joining him in the cast. Of course, the film never got made, and even with such a great cast, it would have been really tough for it to turn out as well as the version we just showed. It is a great movie, I think.
Dodsworth is a really special movie, an honest movie about marriage, pretty rare for the time. I figure if anybody can remake it, it is the grandson of both the movie's producer, Sam Goldwyn, and its writer, Sidney Howard. James Kim is the showrunner of Talking Pictures. The managing editor is Darby Maloney. Video editor is Andrew David Lewis. Dory Stegman is our talent producer. Additional talent booking by Noea Murphy. Glenn Matullo mixes every episode. Set design by Raphael Laurier and Leanne Reagan-Barnes. Angela Carone is our director of podcasts at TCM. Team at HBO Max Podcasts, that's executive producer Michael Gluckstad, senior producer Allison Cohen-Sirokach, and producer Kenya Reyes. The HBO Max Concept and Design Studio, Marta Duarte Diaz, Karen Guan, and Kendall Thomas. Production support from Jaco Friedman, Liz Winter, John Renault, and Kristen Hassel, and special thanks to Julie Baton. That's our show. You can watch this podcast on HBO Max and YouTube, as well as listen to it wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. See you next time.